Welcome, Greek U Nation, to episode number 326 of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. I'm your host, Mike Eilon, CEO of Greek University. I'm a speaker and a two-time author. Our second book is called From Letters to Leaders, Redefining New Member Education and Leveraging Belonging to Eliminate Hazing. That book is available now on Amazon. We call these episodes the Fraternity Foodie Podcast because there is nothing like great food to bring college students together. Fun fact, growing up, Happy Days was a television show that I just loved to watch because it had this really feel-good family message, and Fonzie was just an icon of his era. Today, we're going to be talking a little bit more about this show, Happy Days, and we're going to ask the question, is everybody really happy? I think that is a great question. On today's show, we have David D'Arazi, an author for the second time. He's taken all the information from his sister's diaries and scrapbooks since the early 1960s, and he wrote an incredible book with it, which is actually his second book. David graduated from UC Irvine, and then he got his master's degree in business at Cal State Los Angeles. He is also an award-winning salesman for many years. I can't wait to get started. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Mike. I'm really excited about being here.
It's great to see you, Dave. I'm really honored that you're on the show with us today. And I want to jump right into your books because I am just fascinated with some of the stuff that you're putting out. You wrote a book about the successes and the struggles of an influential 20th century artist, which happens to be your dad, Tony. And it's detailed in this first ever biography. You called it The In-Between Artist, The Story of Tony D'Arazi. So talk to us a little bit about your father. Seems like he was a really talented guy.
He was an amazing guy. In other words, the reason The In-Between Artist, he was the first in-between artist for Walt Disney for the movie Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And he had a lot to do with the creation of Dopey, the character in Snow White, which ended up being the longest run film ever for Walt Disney at that time, cartoon film. But he was born in Missoula, Montana. And, you know, at the age of 4, his dad, who owned a bar, he was the oldest of 11 children, immigrants from Italy. They owned this D'Arazi's bar in Italy. And he was sitting under a bar stool, and they saw him at 4 years old draw this picture, a duplicate picture of a World War I on the wall. And he actually, it was amazing. And from that day forward, his father knew that he'd be an artist. And make a long story short, when he was 18, he says he's doing a show in Missoula, Montana. He did cartooning and singing and all that, went to Loyola University, Iona High School at the time. And his dad says, "Where do you want to go to school?" And he said, "Dad, I want to go to the #1 art school in America." Well, you can imagine this guy owned a bar. And anyway, he managed to get him there. He got the Art League of America, the Art League school in New York City. And he excelled his first year. I mean, he was compared to Michelangelo. He was the youngest guy on the board of directors. He was at the top. And then, so he went back his second year, and he had an unfortunate thing that occurred. He was given a Mickey. He's a good-looking college kid, and 2 gentlemen gave him a Mickey. He woke up the next morning, passed out naked in his room. Make a long story short, that was the result of his first nervous breakdown. He just flipped out. His dad had to come from New York to get him. And basically, he took him back to Missoula, Montana. His uncle was a psychiatrist at a prison nearby, and he helped him recover over 6 months. They brought him back. And so he went back to University of Montana in Missoula. When he got better, got his degree, and then he got back into his art. He actually taught for a while too. And then he decided in 1933, after the war, to go to Chicago and bring his 2 best drawings. And he was walking through, and the 2 priests saw him. Says, "What do you got there, Sonny?" He says, "Well, I got 2 of my drawings, these are religious drawings." And he says, "But I don't have enough money to put them in the World Fair." He says, "Well, how much you need?" At that time, it was $10 per drawing. Make a long story short, they gave him the money, and he won first place. And he won the first place, and from the university to there, he won the first place in the World's Fair in 1933. From there, he got on the radio. He had his own radio show in Chicago, and it was the top radio show in the area in 1934, 1935. And then he had an unfortunate thing, his fiancée committed suicide, so he wanted to get back to LA. And he got back to LA. He saw that Disney was hiring for Snow White. That's how his Disney thing started. He got there. There were 1,000 applicants. He was one. There was only 4 people they picked. He was one of the 4. From there, he went and he got his own radio show on KHJ radio, teaching kids how to draw. And then from there, he saw that TV was coming out, and basically he got his own TV show on KTLA, Uncle Tony O'Dare, first cartoonist of the year. But even before that, with my mom, he got married right after Disney, and he did tour the United States in vaudeville for a year, 38 states in the years of Frank Sinatra. And so it's amazing life. And then the tragedy at 47, he got in a car wreck. He lost his memory for 6 months. His TV career looked like it was ending. And then basically he came back and he started doing part-time acting again, All in the Family, Stanford and Son, Dragnet. He did all that stuff. And plus he was selling cars and in the 50, the mid 56, 57. And he had a great life, and he stayed with art the whole time. And basically he died. His desire was to go to Italy when he passed. He went to Italy, had his other nervous breakdown. But I used to see this growing up, and that's all in the book. And it was very tough growing up with a dad with mental illness, but I learned a lot.
Yeah. How did you get all of these materials together to write the book? I mean, where did all of this information come from?
Well, what's interesting, Mike, I actually saw him write his journals. He wanted to write a book in his lifetime. And then my mom died about going on 12 years ago. And about 15 years ago, I was in her garage, and she had all these milk cartons full of notes and journals, scrapbooks. And she says, David, you might want to do something with these someday. So here I was in my 60s, I'm still working, doing well. I thought, okay. So it took me about 6 years to write, and I wrote it. And it's 80% is in his words, and then 20% of all my memories. And it's just a great story of a very successful man that if he would have stayed healthy, who knows what would have happened.
Yeah. How did that impact you? I mean, he certainly had a lot of struggles. I mean, you talked about the nervous breakdowns and the mental health. I mean, talk to us a little bit about some of those struggles, what you saw as a kid, and how that impacted you.
Oh man, it really impacted me. I mean, when I was 7 years old, is when my dad took off for 6 months after that accident. I asked my mom, "Where's Dad?" And so, she said, "Oh, he's okay. He's in a hospital." But I remember one time as a kid, I went there and I saw these, people with mental illness walking around, and kind of freaked me out. And then, and then at 7 years old, he came home, and I didn't know what to expect. He'd just sleep all the time. And then when I was 14, so my mom kept me involved with him up until I was 14, and she was struggling, trying to get him. He had another nervous breakdown, tried to get him to go in the hospital. And she said, David, why don't you see if you could talk him into it? I mean, 14-year-old kid. So I had to drive with him to the hospital, because at those times you had to commit yourself, just like now. I mean, you can't just invade the privacy of mental illness. So anyway, he looks at me as a 14-year-old kid. He said, David, should I do this? I said, Dad, I love you, man. You got to do it. You got to get better. So anyway, and it went on like that. I saw 2 or 3 breakdowns like that. And I became an adult at a very young age. And basically I learned a lot. I listened to him, and it was a struggle. But I managed to hide it when I was in high school. All the kids, when I went to my reunion, they said, hey man, I didn't know that was going on with you. I was most inspirational on the football team, and I just love life. But I got through it. You just got to set it aside. But I helped him, and I got through it all. But it was a struggle, and he had struggles too, obviously.
Yeah. Now, I mean, that's just talking about your dad, who is an incredible guy. You also wrote the second book. It's called Is Everybody Happy? That's about your sister, Kathy O'Dare. Talk to us a little bit about your sister, Kathy, and what it was like growing up with her.
Oh, it was a trip growing up with my sister. She was her first big break. She took acting since the age of 3. It's kind of like my mom was in vaudeville with my dad, beautiful woman you'll see in the book. And, and basically she wanted to be a movie star. My dad wouldn't let her. He's a very jealous man, like a lot of men are. They stay away from my wife. And basically she took her to acting like from the age of 3 to 11 when she got her first break. She was actually went to school with guys like Mark Hamill and Star Wars. And, a lot of the girls she went to acting school with became big stars on TV shows, Young and the Restless, etc. But I got to see her. I got to see her, she did little shows and stuff like that growing up. But her first big break was with Richard Donner on Banana Split's Adventure Hour. She is one of the Sour Grape Girls. And, he was the guy that directed Lethal Weapon and Superman and all that. And, but it was really great. I mean, I never got to go to the set, but I heard the stories from my mom and all the things that transpired, and a few things in the book that I was able to share. And it was pretty cool having a sister that was a movie star, TV. She made that movie with Ronnie Howard, Eat My Dust. That was one of her big movies she made with him.
Yeah.
And, but it was a great experience, and I loved her a lot. And so I found so what I did after I wrote my dad's book, I was going, when she passed, I went and I cleaned out her place, and all of a sudden I find all these scrapbooks and journals. And it's weird. When people are mentally ill, they write you every week. I mean, and I still got those letters. I haven't put them in a book yet, but you could see how things kind of digress and how their writing is kind of like what's going on in their mind, and but yeah, and then I put it together, and it's a great story. I mean, and she died at 52, but what a fun life she had. I mean, and I got through her delusional times when she was well and everything, and it's all in the book. And I'm sure I'm not alone, but I figured I'd share that with the world because she lived quite a life and quite a big star, and not many people knew about it.
Yeah, that's really incredible that both your dad and your sister really documented a lot of the things that they were going through, and that enabled you to capture it all in the books. It's just so interesting. And the other thing is, I've been to UC Irvine a bunch of times to go out and speak with the students there. I know you chose them for your undergraduate college experience, but I mean, at that time, there were plenty of very great institutions all over the state of California. Why was Irvine your choice?
Why Irvine was my choice? That's an interesting question. I was all ready to go. I wanted to get in USC because I wanted to be a dentist. Okay.
Right.
But it didn't happen. And so I actually applied 5 straight years to be a dentist, and it didn't happen. But anyway, everything ended okay in life. And then I was going to UCLA. I was all set to go to UCLA. And all of a sudden, a buddy of mine says, "Hey, did you hear about this new school, UC Irvine? I mean, by the beach." I mean, I used to study out by the beach in Balboa. I said, that sounds pretty cool. 8,000 students versus over 35,000 students. And anyway, and their big major there was science, and I took science major, and I degree in biology and chemistry and like the master's. And I figured, why not? So I went there, and it's a great school, and today it's one of the top-rated schools in America, and it's pretty cool. I got a great education there, and it's weird. For 10 years, I got married and had 2 kids, but I didn't do much with it. Then I went back, I got my master's and interviewed at the placement center at 30 years old. And that's how I got in the industry I'm in today. And it's never too late, for people to make up their minds. And it's weird. You talk to a lot of kids today, and they don't know what they want to do until they're 30 years old. And then they say, "Oh, I better do something, right? Make a living."
Hey, I'm still figuring out. I'm in a doctorate program right now, so I'm still in school trying to figure it all out. I mean, listen, you have a lifetime, and ultimately things shift, things change, and certainly that better than anyone. You ultimately became one of the world's top award-winning salesmen. So how do you credit your success to having both a sister and a father who struggled with mental illness?
Well, I think what I learned to engage I learned to be a super listener growing up. I saw my dad, he was so charismatic. And I mean, I used to hang out with him even when he was in his high states, and people just thought he was just full of life, and he just made people laugh. My dad had a great sense of humor. He'd make funny jokes. And I guess that's how I just engaged with them. And I used to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and go out in the studio, from 7 to 16, 18 years old. I used to interact with them at 3 o'clock in the morning, and I used to see how he just painted and how he loved what he did and how he read his art books. And then I used to see the guy that did The Graduate. I used to sit outside with my dad, the guy that wrote the story, The Graduate, and used to sit there and talk to him. But I met all kinds of interesting people with my dad, and I saw my dad interact. So I guess, and with my sister, I learned to engage. I engaged with her, like when they went through their mental states, I'd actually figure out, how do I do this, and just listen. And I guess I have probably one of the best, I really have listening to what's all about in sales, and you kind of listen for that little hot button. And then when you hear it, you go, okay, I know where to go now. This is what they need.
Yeah. It's interesting, you said before that nobody really knew what was going on with your dad, that he was struggling, because it wasn't something you talked about. It wasn't something you were telling your friends about or anything like that. And I think that continues today. I think there's a lot of stigma around mental health in families, and nobody wants to admit that maybe there's a problem in their family, because then that somehow puts everybody in a bad light. So if someone is listening to this interview now, let's say they have a family member who is struggling with mental illness, how can they make it a positive part of their life instead of feeling all of this shame and hiding it?
Well, I think now is a better time than ever. I mean, think about it. When I wrote the book, The In-Between Artist, 3 years ago, it wasn't even talked about that much. But then you had COVID and all this mental illness. It's on the front pages of everyday paper. I think what they need to do is love them, help them, engage with them, sit down at its meal table with them and talk to them, try to hear them out. I mean, I did that years ago. And maybe I just, when I was out there and the kids didn't know about it at school, I was a fun guy, I'm most inspirational player on the football team. I got voted by my teammates. And it's like, you've got to just basically just get in their face, you might say, and just deal with it. See how you could help them. There's a lot of things out there that'll help them. I actually met a guy when I was working part-time and selling advertising for many years. And basically his sister was put in a PERP program by the sheriff department, and they interview him and they find a place for him. But you just there's things out there that'll help people more and more every day. I mean, I just read something today that there's more money going into a different organization here in Los Angeles. I mean, there's help out there, and you don't have to do it all. Don't feel you have to take on the burden of living with them every day, but maybe you could find some place for them. My sister lived 10 years, the last 10 years of her life, in a halfway home. And I mean, I actually visit her every 2 weeks. I actually talk to her a couple times a week. I mean, sure, they're going to be kind of talking out of their mind sometimes, but you could, once in a while, she would say something when I was with her and having lunch, and I'd pinch her. I said, Kathy, that's not real. That can't be. And she goes, you're probably right. In other words, they can engage if you have the patience to engage.
Yeah, that's really helpful. I think for anybody who's out there who has family or friends who are struggling with their mental illness, I think that's great advice. Is just to engage with them and see what resources are out there. I think you're absolutely right. I think there's more and more resources every single day, but there's still not enough. I mean, clearly, we have a large homeless population, and we have a lot of people who are just struggling with mental illness here in this country, and there's not a lot of good systems for everybody. A lot of people don't want to go. They'd rather have their freedom as opposed to being cooped up. There are people who really don't like the side effects of medication, for example, makes them feel kind of numb and things like that. So, I'm just wondering, have you seen that kind of hesitation to go and get help from your sister and your dad?
Oh, all the time. I mean, my dad and my sister, because it's weird when they not on medication, like my father was manic depressive, bipolar.
Yeah.
My sister was schizophrenic paranoia. And it's like they get in this state and they're happy and they're excited that they're on top of the world. My dad, when he was in manic state, he just, he wanted to give away everything they had, and basically, but they don't feel good when they get depressed. I mean, remember my dad came home after 6 months in Camarillo State Hospital, and he slept for 12 hours a day. I mean, they don't like that. They can't live their life. So, but you know, there's a lot more medications out there now that, you know, if they could, you know, they can make it work. I mean, look at Jonathan Winters on the D. Martin show years back, and some of these actors even today. I mean, they could levelize and live a normal life, but the family has to be with them and friends, and you know. And as far as picking your friends, you know, that's important too, because obviously it's college students. I mean, look at my dad's situation. My sister had a situation when she was 18, just going to junior college, and that kind of messed her up. It's in the book too, you know. It's just. But if family's close, and just stay tuned with what's going on, because yeah, there's a lot of homeless out there, and yeah, you know, join organizations, donate to organizations and help them. I'd like to do that someday if one of these is made into a movie, which I think it'd be a great story. You know, I got enough. I've done very well, making 3 times as much as I ever had in sales, working smarter, not harder. But you take what you learn, and that's what it's all about.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for tackling this issue of mental illness in both of these books. I think it's great that you humanize it. You talk about your dad, you talk about your sister, and then other people who are reading that, they kind of figure out, okay, I kind of understand where to go with this and how I can help my friend or how I can help my family member. So I applaud you for writing about it and sharing those stories and trying to normalize that to get rid of that stigma surrounding mental health. So what's the next book you're thinking about writing? I mean, there's got to be another book in your head that you're like,
yeah, it sure is, Mike. And that's interesting you ask. I mean, you know, my oldest son helps me edit it. He's a producer for Flea Market Flip and all. He's been in reality TV for 25 years. And I'm blessed with 4 sons. And so, you know, I talked to them about the books, and they got to know their granddad they never met. And they kind of put some, you know, there's some inserts in the book about how they knew my sister, but they said, Dad, what you really need to write is a book about how you managed to be at the top in sales your whole career, nearly 40 years. So my next book, I got the title, I've actually started it. And what's interesting, I've done some journals through the years. I got a little cabin up in the mountains. And so they said, you got to write your book, Dad. So anyway, it's going to be called How to Become the top 2% of your sales force and be there year after year. And it'll kind of tell where I came from. You know, I talked about my family. Now I'm going to talk what I learned from all the places. I've been with 2 major corporations, 1 smaller company. Now I've been independent for 6 years as a consultant. And I'm going to, you know, I've read all the books, you know, on sales. I mean, I went through that cycle in my generation: Zig Ziglar, Wayne Dyer, Dennis Waitley, Tony Robbins. They're going to hear Dave's story, and it's really an interesting story. I used to have the director of Merck come up to me when we were sitting at lunch during a sales meeting. He'd say, Razzie, he says, how do you do it year after year? So I'm going to give it away. I kind of kept it to myself for many years, but I'm going to share what I learned, those secrets, in my next book. And I'm excited about it. You know, I really am. It'll be a good one. So.
Yeah, good for you. I actually have our 3rd book is going to be coming out February 1st. And I, like you, just want to give back to other people so that way they learn everything that took me decades to figure out. If I could give it to them in a book and they're done reading it in a couple of hours, well, you know what? I just gave them a huge shortcut, and maybe one person's going to pick up that book and really do something amazing with it. So I'm just like you know, let's just share the information to help future generations, and maybe shortcut their success as opposed to making all the mistakes that I fell into.
That is so true, isn't it? I mean, it's like, and I'm like, you're probably like myself. I mean, I love reading all these stories. I'm anxious to read your book too. It basically what you could learn, even if it's one thing you learn out of that book, it makes a big difference in your life. You know, I mean, you know, and it's weird. It's interesting. In a lot of sales situation, I repeat certain things that I learned, and you just pull them like you pull them out of a hat. One of the things I do as a hobby, I'm a magician too at the Magic Castle in Hollywood, and I just do that for fun. But you know, you get in a situation, if you read enough and learn enough, you'll have an answer for anything.
Yeah. Good for you, man. I
Yeah.
really enjoyed getting to know you a little bit. Now, we do love to eat good food here at the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. So I need to know, what's your favorite restaurant in the Los Angeles area the next time I'm out there?
Okay, I got a few for you.
All right.
Okay. My favorite Italian restaurant is a little Italian restaurant in Eagle Rock, this little city I grew up on. It's called Colombo's. I don't know if you remember or seen on TV the old series Colombo.
Sure.
Anyway, they got all the Frank Sinatra pictures in there. It's a real nice, and they got jazz on weekends, and it's really a cool place for good Italian food, good homemade Italian food.
Mhm.
Sandwiches. Have you ever been to Felipe's in Los Angeles?
Not yet.
Oh my God, it's the oldest sandwich shop in California. It's over 100 years old. My dad used to bring me there at 3 o'clock in the morning, but now they don't open 24 hours. Best roast beef sandwich you'll ever have.
Mhm.
And as far as breakfast, Pantry is a great place. They're open 24 hours. Have you been there?
I think I've been there before.
Yeah,
I
you
had
might have been
that
there
last
before.
time I was there. Very, very
Yeah,
good. Yeah,
but
that was
those are
good
those
stuff.
are good ones.
All right, good.
Those are
So I have two new places that I need to go out and check out. So I'm excited for Italian. I mean, as somebody who grew up in New York City, you can imagine, being in Little Italy and other places. There's some
oh
fantastic
yeah.
food out there. But
You
I
gotta
can't wait to head out to LA and try yours. So I'll let you know what I think. All right.
yeah, definitely. Let me know.
All
They're
right, that
great
sounds
places.
good. That
All
sounds
right.
good. Well, listen, Dave, this has been a true joy. Thanks so much for sharing your family with us and these books. So everyone needs to go out and pick up these books. The first one is called The In-Between Artist, the story of Tony Durazzi. And of course, the second book is called Is Everybody Happy? That's all about Dave's sister, Kathy O'Dare. So fantastic work. Dave, you are the man. Thank you so much for sharing your story with us today.
Thanks, Mike. I really enjoyed it.
All
And
right,
good
my
luck with your new
pleasure.
book.
Of
Huh?
course, that sounds
Yeah.
good. So, yeah, the new book that we're going to be putting out on February 1st is really going to be leveraging your fraternity or sorority experience on a college campus and then using that in order to land your dream job. So that's really what we're going to be talking about, is taking those skills learned in college and then how do you make that into your dream job, your dream career? And I think if we can show students how to do that, I think that's going to alleviate a lot of their anxiety and it's going to help them get almost immediate success with some of the things that they learned in college. So that's my next stop.
Awesome. That's so important. You got to know where you're going if you're going to get there,
Absolutely. And how to use the
right?
tools that you have, right?
Yeah,
So,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
much appreciated. All right. Well, listen, to our listeners, if you enjoyed this talk with Dave, make sure that you like it and also share it on social media. That's super important. And we hope to see you on another episode of the Fraternity Foodie Podcast. Thanks so much for joining us, and we're going to see you next time.